Good evening and welcome to Ludlow Fringe Festival here in Shropshire in the Welsh Marches. I am Nick Causton. I'm the patron fringe, the fringe patron this year for my sins. Absolutely delighted. I grew up in Ludlow. I was born and bred here. I left about 40 years ago to go to university to start a career in engineering, in advertising and digital technology, and have very fond memories of my time growing up in Ludlow and the breadth of experiences and opportunities open to me in my education, in my schooling, and through the contacts I made. And one of the people I spent a lot of time with was Mr. Chitham, who lived just near us in Bridgewood, who built the most fantastic TT model railway layout, and we'll talk about that later on. But it was a model railway that I saw in the Methodist Church Hall here in Ludlow about 20 years ago when I came back with a New York model girlfriend of mine. We went to see a model railway and a big sign saying Nick Causton made this, which is all quite fun. And then 10 years ago I was in Ludlow Library, and there's Mr. Chitham's model of Ludlow Station, which is just here beside us in the brewery, next to the brewery here. The station from that had been donated to the museum by his family. So I thought somebody was telling me something about my time with model railways, with waiting for the King George V to steam down the line, missing my lunch on a Sunday, waiting for that to go past because it never seemed to run on time. And absolutely delighted to be here. So welcome to this event which we're calling The Art of Trains. And before I go much further, I should admit to never having done any live streaming before a year ago. I started a project in my son's primary school, 10 years ago now, to bring the community together to run creativity days. 5 years later, I gave my career up to roll it out across the country as a non-profit social enterprise called STEAMco, which is about connecting our kids with their art and our communities with their schools. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here today in the brewery, the old brewery, in the old goods shed. Actually, this is the old goods shed of Ludlow Station, so it's particularly significant. The brewery is not open tonight because of social distancing, so we've got a very small audience tonight. We've got some fantastic speakers, and it's going to be a really, really super evening. The programme of events I'm running is under the name of the hashtag ArtConnects21 events. So we've done the art of cardboard with some amazing cardboard modelers and cardboard artists. We did a 3-day Your Glasto, hashtag Your Glasto 21, where we built a cardboard Glastonbury pyramid stage at the primary school that I used to go to on Cleeve View. We then built that same cardboard pyramid stage in Castle Square on Saturday and Sunday because it was all done in computer graphics. It was a complete fake. I'll show you some of that later on, but we're just showing that art is the killer combination for me of creativity, tools and people, where tools can be technology, it can be cardboard, it could be dance or music, whatever. So it's the creativity, it's the tools or the medium and the people. And tonight we're talking about the art of trains and how railways, culturally, historically, model-wise, might inspire kids, might connect kids with broader audiences, connect them with their curriculum. This is not just about children. This is not a child's event tonight. This is primarily a sort of grown-ups event, I suppose. We've got some great speakers. We've got Andrew Adonis, who was a former transport minister, very outspoken on transport, but also a big fan of the railways. We've got representatives from the Model Railways Club. We've actually got a real train rundling through in the background, which is fantastic. This is totally realistic. And we've got some local cultural historians and model makers as well, and I've even got a couple of my trains in the camper van. But first I'd like to cut to a chat I had with Christian Walmer earlier. Christian Warmer is a fantastic author. He's very, very generous in terms of giving us his time. At the last minute, he wasn't able to actually make it today. So I'm going to cut to that now and join you on the other side of this. One of the books that really changed my life was obviously Rocket Boys, which my dad found in the Oxfam bookshop here in Ludlow that he was volunteering in, about 4 boys who learned to make rockets and ended up working for NASA. Quite an incredible story. I haven't had time to read many books over the last 2 years, but my dad found another book actually in that Oxfam bookshop called Fire and Steam. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the author of that book, because that book really rekindled my passion, my interest, a desire to learn more about the railways and the history of the railways. And I'm delighted that on my left, or I never know which way to, that's right, I've got it right. I'm pointing left. On my left is Christian Warmer, the author of that book. Hello, Christian. $1 million question. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just slightly saddened that your dad found it in an Oxfam shop, because I don't get any royalties for that. But I'm delighted that the book's been recycled.
Somebody bought it once, Christian. Don't you worry about too much about that.
Absolutely.
Now, excuse my complete ignorance. I'm not totally sure how to introduce you. I know you as an author of one book, but I have actually since. It's like when you see something, it seems to pop up all the time. I've seen you pop up on the TV. I've seen you writing in newspapers. How do you tell your friends and family what it is you do? What's your kind of what does it say on your tin, if you like?
Well, at heart, I'm a journalist, and I'm proud of being a journalist, because journalists get a very bad name a lot. But I think the basic kind of skill of a journalist, of researching something, of making calls, of asking questions, of investigating, and then trying to report what they see as the truth. Of course, that doesn't always happen in some of our tabloid papers, but essentially the core job of a journalist is an honourable one. So I see myself as a journalist, but I've slightly transformed into being an author, having written some 20 books. And I'm a frequent broadcaster, so I now call myself author and broadcaster, but that's a bit pompous, isn't
it? Not at all, not at all. I mean, maybe if you really want to bring yourself up to date, you'd call yourself a live streamer as well. I'm sure you've done a bit of live streaming in the last year, have you?
I certainly have done far too much live streaming over the last year.
So, I mean, I think I saw you down on the list of speakers for schools. Have you been managing to keep that going this last year, the connection with school communities?
No, unfortunately. I mean, I've done about 15 of those talks, and I love going to places like, I don't know, Sutton Coldfield and Grimsby and Beeston near Nottinghamshire, and giving a talk to a bunch of mostly comprehensive kids, because they're so glad that somebody, even a Z-list celebrity like me, makes the effort to come up to talk to them. And very often you get kids coming up and saying, look, thank you so much, sir, for coming out. You really inspired me. I really like what you had to say. And that's very rewarding for me. And I just don't get that from Zoom. And so I haven't been doing it over Zoom, because it's not the same experience. It's the very fact that you go somewhere to somewhere, and I always go by train, and I generally walk to the school, where it's a couple of miles away, and so I get a feel of what the place is like. And then you meet these kids, and they're always full of energy. They're always kind of, got a thirst for knowledge, and always the first question is very difficult to get somebody to ask. And then by the end of it, there's 20 kids with their hands up. It's such a heartening experience that, it's something that you can't replicate by Zoom. And it's one of the lessons we've got to learn from this blasted pandemic, is that while Zoom and Teams and whatever is a very useful way of communicating, it does not replace human interaction. And my God, I'm looking forward to giving talks to people, to giving speeches, to attending conferences, to doing all that stuff back to normal.
It's fun. Well, this event is called the Art of Trains, and it's part of a series of events called Art Connects 21 here at Ludlow Fringe. Because I got a lovely phrase from a chap called Seth Godin a few years ago. He says that art is what we call it when what we do might connect us to somebody else. So for me, art doesn't have to be about paint and galleries. It could be painting, photography, cooking, coding, dancing, design, DJing, robots, rockets. I talk about Stephenson's rocket as much as I talk about dynamite and SpaceX type rockets. And I think the fact you are here with me today on a fake car, a fake trailer for Ludlow Fringe in front of a photo of Ludlow Brewing says everything about the power of trains to connect. Here we are in front of Ludlow Brewing Company, which is basically in the old goods shed here at Ludlow Station. If you went up the hill to the left of Tesco, you'd see Ludlow Museum. And in the foyer of that building is a model of Ludlow Station made in TT gauge, that's 3mm to the foot, as opposed to 4mm for the normal railways. And it's got my name on it. I actually helped build that with Mr. Chittum on a Saturday morning. So here I am so proud to be here with you today, because you haven't really said it, but you are an author, you're a broadcaster, you're a streamer on Zoom, whether you like it or not. And your specialist subject, as far as I'm concerned, is trains, is railways, is locomotions, is the whole cultural, historical, engineering, inspiration and significance of that. I mean, do you do anything else, or is it really railways and transport you focus on?
No, mostly railways. I have written books about other subjects as well, but it is railways are at the heart of it. But let me say something about that, because I think it's rather interesting. Often people are rather denigrate kind of people who are interested in railways as train spotters, or grisers is the kind of
I haven't heard that one before.
In America they're called foamers in America, because apparently when they see a steam engine they foam at the mouth, right? And that's the derogative term for train spotters in America. But do you know what? I'm not really a train spotter. I mean, I really don't know one end of an engine from another. I don't really quite understand how a steam engine works. I can sort of explain it, but not very well. I'm totally uninterested in kind of, which locomotive went where or where. At the age of 15, I used to kind of collect their numbers avidly, but then I discovered girls and gave up. And so the key point is that the railways changed the world in so many ways. Nick, I mean, it's really unimaginable to think what would have happened if we hadn't had the invention of railways. And that's what I'm interested in. So I'm interested in the social aspects, the historical aspects, the political aspects, the economic aspects, even the organizational aspects, because actually railways created the first major companies. If you think about it, when you're running a railway, one end is in London, the other end is in Edinburgh, you actually have amazing kind of staffing and managerial implications that nobody else had done before. So just conceive of this: before the railways arrived, right? Nobody had really traveled faster than a horse could gallop, or a sailing ship could sail in a storm. 20, 30 miles an hour, that was it. And within kind of 20 years, the first railway, Liverpool, Manchester, as described in my book, Fire and Steam. And then 20 years later, there were trains running from London to Oxford at 55, 60 miles an hour. And this was unheard of. And then when you translate that into longer distances, suddenly Manchester becomes maybe 5 or 6 hours from London, when it had been 2 or 3 days from London. And so just imagine the transformational aspects of that. And what I try to do in a lot of my books is to get that across, and particularly to the younger generations you're trying to address, who often think that, cars are wonderful. Well, they're now going to think, well, the internet changed everything. Well, actually, no, ways that enable the spread of essentially capitalism to go from to take the technology that was developed in the Industrial Revolution in the north of England throughout the world. And if it hadn't been for the fact that you put this technology on wheels, in other words, you put the steam engines on wheels, you start then creating power that enables you to drag carriages and wagons and freight kind of across the world. That's how the whole economic development that changed us from being a basically agrarian culture based on agriculture to an industrial culture based on heavy engineering, and it was the railways that did it. And for almost 100 years, so 70, 80 years, until the cars started coming along in the end of the 19th and beginning century, and cars started arriving, the railways were the only way to get around, and they were the only way to carry freight for long distances. And so, this was two generations between 1830 and 1900 where they only knew about railways. And so, your most important possession was your Bradshaw, which was the timetable of where the trains go. What happens when Sherlock Holmes wants to go off and investigate? He gets Watson to go get the Bradshaw and look up where the train time is. And that was true of everything in that century.
Absolutely. I mean, it really was. I think the railways are a fascinating area, aren't they? I mean, the breadth of interest that they have for people, really. I mean, the historical relevance, the engineering, all those things, and that's what fascinates me, and that's why I think they're a great subject for kids, basically, because they have that history, they have that element of creativity, that element of making, that element of imagination, the wonder, the awe, the history. I mean, like many subjects, they almost are a history lesson in one. I love showing this picture to kids. That is me on a stage in Sunderland, launching Steam Cone Sunderland, and we literally found that cardboard model of Stephenson's rocket in a skip. They were using it for an exhibition the week before, and they were throwing it out. It's made of cardboard, and we put it up there. And I talked to them how a lad from Sunderland, Newcastle area, who had been illiterate until the age of 12, because he'd worked in a pit from the age of 4 in the pitch black with opening and shutting doors, had learned to read the manual, had the idea of putting some wheels on a boiler, and invented the world's first passenger carrying steam loco. And if we're going to stay with the train spotting stuff, and I've never been able to get my head around the idea of sitting on a platform catching numbers. Even you've trumped me there, I'm afraid. But I did drag my son down to Didcot once. I'm sure you've seen that loco yourself. And he actually did fill his nappy when it let off steam, So we had a father and son moment that day. But I think there's such pleasure to be had from trains. And there's a teacher I know in Salford, funny enough, an art teacher, lovely lady, who laments the fact that her son is absolutely obsessed with trains, like absolutely crazy. And we've been worried in the past about, well, not worried, but rather bored with our children being obsessed with Star Wars or this, that, and the other. But my goodness, I think every parent's job has got to be to get their kids passionate and interested in something, hasn't it? And I think railways, as you've just said, they're offered so much. Yeah.
I think actually you could teach the whole curriculum through railways and trains, because it's got everything, hasn't it? It's got engineering, it's got lots of maths with working out tables. It's got lots of politics, because the story is always intertwined with that of governments, and they're always a very important aspect of that. It's you can teach things about the environment, and obviously you can teach all things about transport and geography, and you can do it through railways. I mean, you could literally kind of develop a whole syllabus across the piece, using kind of railways and trains as the kind of core of it. And that's why I'm, these books behind me that in my little shelf on my left and your right, they're all the big books I've written. And you couldn't write kind of 20 books about many things, because you'd run out to say, but you can certainly write endless amounts of books. I mean, all the rest of the books behind me are my library of, and it goes all the way around the room, and they're all books about railways mostly, and transport. And it's generated a fantastic amount of literature. And again, you could the literature of railways. I mean, railways turn up in Dickens all the time, and indeed Dickens was actually in a railway accident. And all those Victorian novelists, have often railways in their stories. So it's a fantastic subject, and I'm delighted you've kind of picked up on that, and I kind of going round kind of talking about the importance of trains.
Well, I think you've touched on a lot in your earlier comments. Actually, I think one of the things I'm finishing a lot of your sentences in my head. I hope you don't mind. For example, when you said a railway company that goes from London, and mine, I went to Penzance because I'm a GWR man through and through, and the micro economy that and the community and the whole industrial circular economy that was generated by that is represented so beautifully down there in Swindon, isn't it, at the Steam Museum? It is
absolutely, and it shows every aspect of it. So
absolutely,
you have to
coachworks,
staff, you have to you have to create the locomotive. Of course, those railway companies built their own locos. You have to have management systems that enable you to, make sure that the people in Exeter and the people in Penzance are doing the same as the people in Reading and in Paddington.
And at the same time as well.
And at the same time. And you have to work out the timetables and how that fits in with all sorts of local needs. And here's a little example that might amuse some of your watchers, which is that until the railways, Britain had lots of different times. Every town had its own time based on the local church clock. And because the sun obviously rises earlier in Norwich than it does in Exeter, because it rises in the east, and it just, it's probably about a 20-minute difference between the two. And when the railways came along, of course, they couldn't cope with it having different timetables, different times in different places, because it would create all sorts of confusion. So they needed a standardized time system, which was based in Greenwich, and called Greenwich Mean Time. And then the world accepted that, because Britain was the great imperial power, the most developed and powerful country in the world. That's why we got Greenwich Mean Time, and that's why we establish it as time zero, as it were, and everybody else is GMT plus or minus something. That was thanks to the railways. And now that bit is often forgotten. People know we got Greenwich Mean Time, but they forget that why was this established? It was because the trains in Exeter were 15 minutes different from the trains in London, and you couldn't cope with that.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think that the railways, you've also touched on the politics as well and the cultural significance, but the railways also massively represented and reflected cultural structures as well, didn't they? And class structures and class systems. At the one extreme, you had this gold rush of entrepreneurs literally laying railway line left, right and centre. I mean, the numbers in your book are phenomenal, aren't they? The miles of rail that were laid in a relatively short period of time. Talk about that and this kind of city finance, entrepreneurial driven gold rush, because for me it's very similar to what's happening with space almost at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, within 20 years, a little bit over 20 years, there were more than 5,000 miles of railway. There's only 11,000 miles now in the UK, because obviously it went up to about 20,000 and then got cut back. But
summarize that again. Summarize that again, Christian. So how many miles were laid in what period? Sorry.
So about 5,000 miles were laid in the first 20 years, or between about 1830 and 1850, 2 or 3 or something. And then it went up to about 20,000 miles by the end of the century, by the 19th century. That was the sort of peak, was just before the First World War, when really every town and village had some sort of nearby connection to the railway, lots of branch lines and whatever. And then it's been pared back to about 11,000 miles. This is all route miles now. But so essentially, within 20 years, about half, mostly the existing rail network, was actually built. And my favorite statistic about that actually is not a UK statistic, but a US statistic, which is that, again, in America, the railway started in 1830. And by 1916, they had more than 250,000 miles of railway. And that meant, when you calculate it back, they opened 8 miles of railway every day in that period between 1830 and 1916. I mean, just count. They opened that amount of railway virtually every day for a period of 80 years.
Give me that number again, Christian. Give me that number again. You dropped out. Sorry.
So in America, they ended up between 1830 and 1916. They built more than 250,000 miles of railway.
Yeah.
And if you calculate that, it's nearly 8 miles of railway per day. Amazing. Every day for that 80-odd year. And you think, what does it take to build a railway? You have to dig in tunnels, and you have to flatten the land, and you have to bring in the rails, and you have to put down the sleepers and install a signaling system, and you have to get the locomotives and all that. You think of that, 8 miles a day for 80 years. I think that's such an important part of the economy. That is what drove the economy of the US to become the biggest in the world, and you know, that was replicated in other places across the world. So it's difficult to exaggerate the importance of the railways in both, not just in themselves, but in the way they spread wealth, capitalism, if you want. They kind of management techniques. They spread all sorts of the whole complex engineering techniques, you know, bridge building, tunnel building, embankment laying, everything. That was all down to the railways. And then all this has been imitated and used for roads and used for other purposes. But the railways were at the core of that.
It makes the idea of slinging a bit of cable from a few telegraph poles, or even in a way under the sea. I mean, basically, a transatlantic cable is just a bit of cable laid on the seabed, isn't it? Really, with a few waterproof joints. But the railways are phenomenal. And as I said,
absolutely. Then just to build on that example, I mean, remember what was next to the railways everywhere? There were the telegraph lines, and you know, the railways enabled a kind of through passage for the telegraph lines, which were initially just to communicate from station to station. But then, because the railways were a very useful kind of route for the cables, you know, they used to all be lined up. I mean, they're not anymore. But I do remember traveling on railways in the 70s and 80s, and you'd see all these massive amounts of what we call telephone lines, but there were more than that. And so again, the railways were at the core of creating that technology, that kind of mass communication, which of course then became, you know, the internet, effectively the core of the internet.
It's interesting because
down to the railway.
It's almost as if they did the hard bit, get the planning permission, buy the land, and once you've got that land, you can capitalize and monetize it as much as you can. So we've talked very briefly about the land rush, the gold rush, the entrepreneurs running railway lines. I mean, at one point there was a phenomenal amount of railway companies running into London, weren't there? Almost tripping over each other. What was the statistic for that, Christian? I seem to remember that was quite a phenomenal number.
Well, that's my latest book actually, which is called Cathedrals of Steam, and it arose because I realized that actually London has more terminus stations than anywhere else. Why does it have so many terminus stations? It's because they're all all built by different railway companies: the Great Eastern, the London and South Eastern, the Great Northern, the Midland, the London and Birmingham, and they all built their own stations, right? So you know, we ended up with a dozen terminus stations, of which all but one, Broad Street, essentially survived. So we have 12 railway stations, which you know, you can maybe set as a competition to get people to name them. And even more remarkably, all except Marylebone were built between 1836 and 1874. So they were built in under 40 years. And if you think of them today, they're pretty massive. You know, these are big kind of buildings with lots of platforms and whatever. And in those days, they were even more massive because they would have associated kind of goods yards with them. They would kind of have all sorts of extra bits that railways needed, extra buildings, offices, and so on. And, you know, these were absolute mega projects. And the fact that they were all built in such a rapid period of time shows just how I just love the energy of it, the entrepreneurship of it, the kind of courage of people investing in this, because all this came from, you know, private money. It wasn't governments that built this. It was private investors who built it, who many of them made a nice profit, but some of them lost their shirts. And I'm absolutely fascinated, Nick, by the Victorian period, because how come it had all this energy and all this courage and all this you know, wonderful feeling of building things for the future and creating, you know, much of the infrastructure of railways that we still use today. I mean, those embankments are still there, and you know, we use them. The tunnels are still there. The routes are largely the same as they were in Victorian times. So they created this thing through competition between the different companies. And eventually, of course, they later were kind of merged and then forced to merge, and we got British Railways. But all that was much later.
It's all. I mean, there really almost was a complete free for all, wasn't there? It was almost like who you knew in Parliament that would sign off your application for planning, and the government at the time just couldn't get enough of it. And I think it's really evident, actually.
That's true. I mean, the planning system was very haphazard, and unlike in a lot of countries, in the UK and in the US, we didn't plan our railway system. What happened was they, I want a line between London and Hereford, and whatever, and then the MPs and the Lords would look at it, and if they had enough mates on the committee, they'd say, "Oh, go on, yeah, you can build that." And they had to show they had the money to build it, which often they ended up not being able to. But essentially, it was a totally haphazard process, which is why we ended up with a lot of duplication. So even today, you can get to Exeter from Waterloo, you can get to Exeter from Paddington, you can get to Birmingham from Marylebone, from Euston, and in the old days you could even get there from Liverpool Street. So it was all about competition.
It's funny, absolutely. It's a bit like the old PPE at the moment, isn't it? Who you know rather than how good you are at doing what you're doing. But let's not go there. It's funny, I think, because this is no more evident than, I think it's something like Edgware Road or Baker Street, where you go into the station and okay, it's technically the underground as opposed to the tube, but those were basically London railway companies, weren't they? And I always remember going down to Baker Street one night and seeing, this is one of my, I'm just showing off my photos now, but we saw a bit of live steam there, and that's actually Edgware Road Station, I think it was, where they literally, it's hard to imagine they were running these things underground with all the steam and smoke and all sorts. But it's quite
yes, I was there I was probably on that train actually in 2013 with sitting in a carriage with Michael Portillo. Actually, we were filming,
lucky you.
we were filming that. He was filming that. And of course, you raise a very important point, which is in one of my other books, the Subterranean Railway, which is that the underground system was steam operated for the first near 40 years of its existence, which seems extraordinary, actually. That you both that you had these steam engines below surface. They were not the deep tubes that we know, the Piccadilly or the Northern. They were the Circle and the Metropolitan, but nevertheless, they were underground, with a few kind of places where they surfaced, but quite extraordinary that they were operated by steam safely. There were no fire, no major fires, no major deaths, no major accidents in that 40-year period, in which the whole system was operated by steam. And often the trains were a minute and a half behind each other. There were rush hours in the 19th century, and all thanks to steam and those engines like the one you showed.
No, absolutely. I mean, it really did bring it home. It was wonderful that night, I must admit. I think the other thing, so we've talked about the entrepreneurs, the money, the backhanders, the lords, the barons, who essentially ran the country in those days. And obviously the country's gone through a substantial social re-engineering project in the last few hundred years since then. Talk to me about the other end of the scale, the workers who were in those railway cottages, the people who built those locos. I always remember something in one of your books about the whites. I didn't realise that engineers, the locomotive drivers, actually had to wear whites. Tell us about the kind of context of that in the terms of employment. Because I was fascinated.
The Great Western, they were the only ones mad enough to do that. But well, I think there's two lots of workers that are of great interest. Actually, there's the people who built it, who were navvies, and they were called the navvies because they were sort of descendants of the navigators who built the canals, which was a generation before, which is a whole other story. And they were often Irish or Scottish or local kind of rural workers who could earn a good bit by working on the railways. But they were very specialist. They went from place to place building the railways and had a lot of skills. And they drank an awful lot, famously, and took all sorts of risks in building these railways, and not a few of them died as a result of that. But they were a fantastic core of men who were very proud of what they did. And then, of course, once the railway is built, you get vast workforces. I mean, the biggest workforces in the country initially were railways. So you need porters, as they were those days. You need people maintaining the track. You need signal workers. You needed ticket collectors, and of course the people driving the trains, and the firemen who had the most onerous job is shoveling coal into the boiler as quickly as they could into the furnace, rather, to keep the boiler kind of in steam. So and this created vast workforces. And of course, as a result of this, it was the railways who were the first to develop major trade unions. And that was a very important part of the history. That and this happened in other countries as well, in America and various other countries. That the first trade unions were railway unions because they had the ability, and they also had the ability to stop things. So they had a certain amount of industrial power. They had huge about reducing hours, about safety. So the railways were a very dangerous place to work. The death rate of workers on the railways, 300 or 400 a year would die quite routinely. Very often, just people run over by trains or all sorts of other mistakes. So that's an important part of railway history, is that not only did it encourage capitalism and kind of, in a way, all the kind of facets of capitalism, but also the railways developed the counterpart of capitalism, which was strong unions.
It's interesting because I'm in Ludlow at the moment, as you know, and I did a bit of research, and apparently there was a monumental railway crash, train crash, just at the end of the road here, New Road Bank, and it was on the front page of the paper, and a massive loco, 462 or something, came crashing off the bridge onto the road below. And it was almost as if that was fairly commonplace, wasn't it? It wasn't as rare as it is today.
Absolutely. I mean, even right until the 1960s, there were quite a lot of train crashes per year. And in the 19th century, there were just endless amounts of train crashes because really little attention, and the improvements in safety built up incrementally. So you would have certain accidents that would raise something of a media storm, even in the 19th century. And as a result, the railway companies would then be forced to implement changes. And I mean, probably the most famous of these occurred in Northern Ireland, where there was a crash that involved a train running away down a hill and smashing into another train. And it was full of school kids in Antrim. And about 90 or 100 of these kids were killed. And after that, they implemented a whole lot of safety changes as a result of this in the 1880s. And it really went on like this, that whenever there was a major accident, they would look at causes, and then they would try to ameliorate them with new safety legislation. But they never kind of really sat down and thought, where are the risks of this technology? What should we do to mitigate them? Until very recently. And now, of course, we have a fantastically safe railway. One crash, unfortunately, the landslip crash that was in Scotland, near south of Aberdeen last year, was the first one that killed any train passengers since 2006 before that. So, we do have a fantastically safe railway now, but it's been built up as a result of the work of lots and lots of people over the years, and lots of people losing their lives.
It's interesting you talk about the railways being a catalyst for unionisation in a large area of the workforce. Do you think, I mean, a lot of people feel rather cynically that Brexit is going to see a reversal of some of those safety measures. My father in my school community had an awful accident on the railways, and he has concerns around safety issues and shortcuts being driven by the privatisation of a lot of this. Do you think we're in danger of going backwards a little bit now at the moment, without getting too political about it?
No, I don't anymore. I mean, in one of my books called Broken Rails, I write about privatisation and how it did initially result in 4 very serious train crashes whose roots were definitely in the fact that the way the railways were privatised, and that was the Southall, the Paddington one a couple of years later in 1999, then Hatfield and Potters Bar, and all those can be traced to the way that the railways were privatised. But because of those, and because of a lot of things that have happened since then, the gaps that were created by privatisation have been kind of, as it were, addressed, and the railways are now, as I suggest, incredibly safe. And I don't think that with Brexit or anything would reverse that. I think the politics of it are such that enabling train crash is not a good look, and
No.
even that very fact would prevent kind of anybody trying to revert what has been fantastic progress in this regard.
No, fair point. Well, we've covered a lot there, Christian. I mean, just finally, really, I mean, to date, Steamco is very much around connecting kids with their art, with their passion, and also connecting communities with schools. So the audience for this talk tonight will not necessarily be children. It might be some young people, but it will be people with an interest in you and the railways and the future of transport. So it's fantastic that we're having these conversations. I mean, what are your thoughts around the future of rail now? I mean, immediate future of rail transport, HS1, HS2. I mean, what in a nutshell, your thoughts around the significance of those? Are you for, against? Is it that binary?
Well, I'm not a great fan of HS2, but I suppose what it does demonstrate, and we see this across the world, is that the railways have a great future, and that's really interesting because in the post-war period, when cars were taking over, when people, politicians, policymakers, civil servants, and the like, all thought that, well, the cars are going to take over, and we really have to shut down much of the railway network. And there were attempts to shut down much more than what happened with Beeching. Beeching cut about a third of the railway network, but there were actually plans to reduce it from 11,000 miles to about 2,000. And those were rejected. And then we started seeing kind of passenger numbers going up, improvements to the railways, kind of modern coaches, and much more comfort. And across the world, we've seen high-speed rail, we've seen metro systems kind of everywhere, tram systems absolutely in all sorts of places being revived, whereas in the 1960s, most tram systems across the world were closed. So rail has a great future because it's a mass transport system. Of course, it's been greatly damaged by COVID, and the economics of railway systems have been greatly affected by COVID. And I think that to some extent, we might not see a return to the strap hanging, to the commuting that we have in the past. But overall, the railways still have a fantastic future. And it's great, for example, to see that sleeper trains have been revived across Europe. Again, something that largely disappeared, and now apparently the first sleeper train yesterday ran between Berlin and Stockholm, a journey that I would love to do overnight. And remember, that crosses the sea as well. I'm generally positive about this. I do see that there's going to be a difficult few years ahead where the economics don't tally so well because of the reductions in peak numbers and so on. But nevertheless, railways are here to stay. And, if I were alive in 2100, I think there'll be a flourishing rail to enjoy them.
Well, with the future, just to sort of wrap up, but I mean, you talk about the future there. I drew the parallel between the expansion of the railways and that gold rush and that infrastructure building with the internet being built, and now the space race, the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos. I mean, we're sponsored today by the Inspiration 4 mission in September. What are your thoughts about, in terms of future transport? What are your thoughts? I know you've got very strong views about electric self-driving vehicles. Do you want to, because a lot of people see that as the future of transport. Yes, could you summarize your thoughts on that? Because I think they're very interesting.
Well, I think what is really interesting is that if you look at a cityscape of 700, you'll see kind of, horse-drawn trams, but also some electric trams. You'll see the beginnings of cars. You'll see some lorries. You'll see trains. And by and large, even though much has changed, those are the technology. We don't have horses and carts, but those technologies endure. We have buses that resemble buses that we look at 100 years ago, double-deck buses. They're, of course, they're modernized and whatever. We have bicycles that, if you see an early 20th century bicycle, it's recognizable for what a bicycle looks like today. And there is this tendency to say, we're going to get completely different systems. We're going to get delivery by drone. We're going to get driverless cars. We're going to get Hyperloop. We're going to get all these technologies. And you know what? Many of these technologies have been around for a long time and haven't kind of taken off for very good reasons. I'm particularly obsessed with driverless cars because so much money has been spent on a technology that has delivered actually very little, and I think is actually running down a branch line, as it were, that is not going to go anywhere. And I could give you a whole lecture on that. But so
hang on, but in one sentence, how would you summarize in a sentence that the branch line and your
the driverless car is, nobody particularly wants it. They don't actually want to be driven about by a machine that they're not completely confident about. The technology just isn't there to operate these vehicles in all ways and all scenarios, particularly with things like roadworks popping up or unexpected events like an elephant in Main Street or whatever. Might not happen very often, but the technology isn't there. You have to train the machine. The machine learning is just impossible to develop because it requires so much training and so costly that it's not there. And we've had kind of nearly 20 years of development of these or attempts to develop these vehicles, and all we have is a few trials in America and a few robo-taxis that operate in very constrained circumstances, which suggests to me that this technology is much more difficult to overcome than the initial supporters thought. And indeed, many of them are now saying, even people like Google, which operates under the name Waymo, even Google are saying, well, we're not so sure that this technology is actually going to deliver as we had hoped, and that we'll all be in driverless cars. I mean, my example is, what do you do when two driverless cars meet each other on a single lane road in the middle of the countryside somewhere? Who would decide to reverse, and how would you sort that sort of issue out? And there's a million questions like that, which I could bore you with.
And it's the small details
resolved.
Don't worry, it's the small details that break it, isn't it? Christian, it's been great talking to you. I think one of the things for me today is how inspiring you are at so many levels, and how inspiring the subject is at so many levels. I'd just like to show you a little film. This is a film of me when I was 1, actually. I'll just pull this up here, with my dad and my first ever train set on just a loop of track. And my dad showed me how to make a bridge, and I show this to kids all over the road. There it is on a big video screen that I rented in Bradford. And I say to people that film, my dad showed me how to use my imagination. But he gave me what I consider to be the 3 greatest gifts. He gave me some of his time to play with me. He gave me some stories to tell you today, and also stories of yours that I share, because he gave me that interest in trains and railways. And he also gave me my art. I became an engineer at university. I made things with cardboard, with Lego, with metal and electronics later, and now the internet and now video tech. But all I'd say to you and people like you is to never, ever underestimate the difference you will make to a child's life, even if it's half an hour on a Zoom call that might not give you the experience and the feedback that you get. There are children who will never, ever experience a personal contact as much as that through a Zoom screen. So to you and everybody on the Speakers for Schools project, don't ever underestimate what you do. And I know you do great work at all levels, but I just can't thank you enough for joining us today, Christian. Any last thoughts about what we've discussed and what we're trying to do here in engaging community to inspire our children?
No, it's a pleasure to help you out, Nick. I mean, I am kind of arrogant enough to think that I am trying to kind of change the world in my little way, and through the books I write, I think the core message always is the importance of the railways and this technology in changing the world, and how also it just remains the most fantastic way to travel, and so much better than the kind of personal kind of space of a car. In a train, you're sharing it with other people. I was on a train yesterday, and we ended up having a long chat to the woman conducting on the train, because she saw our bicycles and ended up talking about her bike and how she was going to go on a bike and whatever. And you just traveling by train is a wonderful experience. So get out of the cars and jump on it and enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. Christian Woolmer, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely fantastic here at the Art of Trains at Ludlow Fringe 21. Thank you so much. Well, here we are back in Ludlow Brewery, which is an absolute pleasure. We haven't got a very big crowd tonight, but it's not about that, it's about the connections. We've got people watching online, which is fantastic. So thank you to you for coming. I think what we'll do is if we just jump to our next speaker, we've got some guests here in the room from Ludlow to come up and just share their thoughts about what they thought about that and what they do. And the first person I'd like to invite up, and then after that we'll just have a quick chat with this person, and then we'll maybe just break if anybody needs to have a little break for a bar or stretch of their legs. I'd like to ask Simon Bolton actually if he could come and join us. Feel there should be a big ripple of applause and the sort of Wembley wave as we part.
Oh, yeah?
How are you doing, Simon? Good to see you.
Good.
Grab that microphone there.
Cheers.
And we should be able to hear you. Just give me a little sound check on that, would you?
Hiya. Can you hear me?
I can't actually, that's unusual. Speak again?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you can. Go on.
I may need to move it further away.
Is it turned on? Just turn it on.
Oh,
Is it?
now it is.
Now it is, but I'm still not hearing it. That's interesting. So that's totally, it's all me. I can certainly get you on a, no, it's not your fault. Well, we can see you on the camera, that's the start.
Okay.
And cut that across there. So we've got you on camera. Let me just see why this microphone's not working. It's possible I didn't plug the right one in here. Try that again.
Hello?
Yeah, that's working.
Is it working?
Looks like it, yeah.
Marvellous.
I can't hear you though for some reason. Let's have a look. I'll tell you why, because I need to press that, and that. Do that again.
Oh, yeah?
I can hear you now.
You done?
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's much better. Give me a sound check.
1, 2.
That's good. Brilliant. So Simon, I'm going to, I'll tell you, you can just nudge that camera around just a touch for me, could you, audience member, who's now being pressed just to get a little bit of me in there as well. That's perfect. Yeah, that's fantastic. You can see how the telly
Brilliant.
works. This is how the telly works, or how the telly doesn't work, depending on how you look at it. But we're doing our best. I'm just a dad. I do what I can. So Simon, tell me a little bit about you. What's your kind of connection to all this? Because I think you kind of came in fairly last minute, didn't you? Via a connection at the library, was it?
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. I've been a primary school teacher for a very long time, and I've done adult training as well, and a lot of it has been to do with enabling people to do what they actually challenge people and enable them to do stuff. And I find that model railways is amazingly there are so many skills that you need to be able to do it, and to be able to acquire these skills is not a difficult thing. And if you can teach people that they can do stuff and give them the confidence to do it, then people can do anything. It's not just model railways, it's anything. And I think that's the important thing.
So are you a teacher at the moment?
No, gave it up.
Okay.
They now pay me not to be.
So how are you using this fantastic insight that railways and trains are a great way of engaging and connecting young people. I mean, are you doing anything with that at the moment? Of interest?
Not necessarily young people. I wrote this book that on how to scratch build, which is making things from just materials, because nowadays you can buy so much really good stuff, but the act of buying isn't always as satisfying as we might think, and especially now with the pandemic on, apparently building stuff, not just railways but loads of different crafts and everything, has been a really big, it's seen a resurgence, and I mean there's all this stuff on telly as well, so I really believe that building things for yourself is it's an enlightening experience that everyone should do it.
It's funny because the Arts Council had the Arts Council was all about art for many years, wasn't it? And I started Steamco 10 years ago and with a focus on creativity, and then we came up with this Art Connects thing, and then the Arts Council wrote a 10-year strategy that didn't actually have the word art in it, believe it or not. And it's now #Let's Create. So creativity is the big thing. Maybe it just feels a bit more accessible to people. And I'm trying to hammer art home. I mean, I bumped into somebody in the churchyard today, and we were chatting. Gave them a ticket for an event in the church on Thursday, and it turned out they run a publishing company over the way, and they've got a book called The Art of Fly Fishing or something similar. And we all know the art of fly fishing as a concept, don't we? We know the art, that passion, that being in your element, and really something you really love doing. So you're a scratch builder of locos, I presume, then, are you?
Yeah.
Okay, you've got a bit of a book there, have you?
Yeah, look.
Gosh.
There's a plug.
Let me see if I can zoom in on that. I've got
it's on Amazon. I've got 5 stars from everybody, including Paul's mum.
Well, that means it's real then if it's on Amazon, doesn't it? I'd love to have a look at that, but social distancing and hygiene and COVID.
I'll give it a spray in a minute.
I'll look when there's no cameras on it.
Okay.
So how long have you been doing this then?
I had a train set, like you did, when I was 8 or something, and my dad always worked for the railways, which meant we were never in the same place because he got shifted around to all the major places like Derby and Swindon and stuff, and so I've always been very keen, Great Western particularly. Although nowadays I'm just, I don't know, I love researching the history of the railways. I find that incredibly interesting because you find, like the last guy was talking about, how people were incredibly innovative. They just went for it and they did stuff, and they made these incredible sort of machines that not only were incredible, they were also very beautiful. I think it's the beauty of these steam locomotives, particularly, that has always attracted me.
So, how do we get kids back into this sort of stuff? Though? I'm not necessarily starting a revolution of railway modelling necessarily, and I've got 2 boys. I mean, I've got a steam loco in the camper van, which I should get out later on, and I've got my Engage stuff.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, we've also got another railway modeller here and scratch builder, Keith, actually, who's absolutely fantastic. And I had 2 boys. I had a narrow gauge railway in the garden. I bought as much Lego track. I don't know if you remember the blue Lego train track as opposed to the one-piece mold.
I wasn't a Lego fan.
You weren't Lego, so there was a blue track which the hardcore aficionados like myself had, and now it's one-piece injection molded curves or straights.
Yeah.
It was a fiddle, I must admit, the blue stuff. Does anybody remember blue Lego track by any chance? No.
I do just about.
You do.
It was about that one. The gauge was about that.
The gauge was that, but they were blue tracks, and you had a longer one and a shorter one for the curves and white sleepers. I bought a whole load off eBay for about a tenner, but it's so tedious because it just keeps falling apart. But I couldn't get my boys. I mean, they've been to model railway exhibitions. They've seen the Flying Scotsman and filled their pants, kind of thing. And it wasn't necessarily excitement. I think it was just a human reaction, and they didn't really bite. I mean, does anybody in the audience have experience of young people showing much interest in model railways?
My youngest daughter's now 12. Until she was at primary school, I could get her into making stuff. As soon as she got her some mobile phones at secondary school, no interest at all. she calls me childish for having model railway.
She what? Sorry.
Calls me childish for having
She calls you childish.
Yeah.
So you've got a daughter who was into it until 12, got the phone, and then crossed the threshold.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't do any making of any sort now, but she was very much into making stuff.
Right. And
I encouraged her.
yeah, it's funny. Actually, I need to get a roving microphone sorted out so we can sort of pick this up a little bit better.
Just shout.
Yeah, well, we can't even pass the microphone, can we? Probably can't pass a roving microphone. We probably shouldn't even be here. But you're our token member of the audience. That's great. I'm delighted that you came along. So you've come to be among friends tonight. So Simon, did you ever tap into this? What were you teaching at school? What was your
Well, it's primary, so manners really, and Lego.
teaching manners and Lego? Did you
Yeah,
say?
yeah.
Manners and Lego. That's not bad.
Plasticine. No, you know, basic reading, writing, and a lot of art. I was mainly an art and drama
Right.
teacher.
So into the arts generally and all
Yes,
that good
yeah.
stuff then. Right, okay. Now it's interesting because as Christian Warmer said there, that railways, not necessarily model railways, and I didn't actually ask him if he was interested in model railways, but he said there's a whole curriculum in the railways, and do you know what? There's actually a whole curriculum in everything.
Yes.
There's a whole curriculum in breweries, that, as we have behind us. There's a whole curriculum in sailing. There's a whole curriculum in the tourist industry in Cornwall, if you really want to drill into it. That's called project-based learning, and we've got a government that think that that's the devil's work,
Yes.
as opposed to narrow curriculums, teaching facts, rote learning, testing, and stuff like this doesn't get much of a look in, does it?
No.
You might get a sort of 10 minutes on Stephenson's rocket, and that's about it. I'm actually going to tell you my Stephenson's rocket. So I went to Liverpool. I had the most bizarre experience trying to find a community centre we could hold an event. And there's this amazing building called the Black Air. I went in there, and a chap came to the door, an elderly chap, and he said, "Well, you need to speak to the owner." And the owner's a chap called Bill, and he lives up in so-and-so street, Levinson Street or something. And it turned out that Levinson Street was named after the MP who was killed by George Stephenson's rocket in Liverpool, the Liverpool MP, which I was quite tickled by, actually. But I'll look for serendipitous connections in absolutely everything, as he says, as we move swiftly on. So how many locos have you built? And I'm not desperately scratching the barrel for questions here. I'm genuinely interested.
Yeah, just a bit. Can I just go back to something that you're
Yeah.
saying about drama? In that things like they put production of the Railway Children on in London in King's Cross.
I saw that, yeah.
Oh, you saw it?
Yeah, in
Oh.
Waterloo I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, was it good?
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
They had a real steam loco or a fake one. I think it was
Yeah.
real with lots of fake smoke, yeah.
But I mean, that's the sort of thing I think that would bring children back. That and the fact that before COVID, I've got a friend who's got a beautiful layout, and we show it at various places. Cardiff, I think, that was the last one. And there are still kids going to model railway shows.
What
There are
gauge
still-
is that out of interest?
It's P4. which
Hang
is
on, I've
the-
never heard of, has anybody heard of P4
Have you
before?
not? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, of course,
See,
yeah.
The audience know. it's the posh version of 4mm of 00. It's
So fine scale.
yes, you have yes. Thank you. More
What
accurate.
did you say?
It's a bit more accurate than gauges is actually right.
Yeah.
So I think, is it called fine scale?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's
Yeah.
a few different fine scales.
I actually
Quite nerdy, hold on, really.
I'd actually quite like to ask the audience. I feel I should sort of flip the camera around and then everybody just sort of hide their faces possibly, so I won't. How many people in the audience are railway modelers? I'm going to put
There
my
we
hand
go.
up to a
That's
degree,
pretty good.
but I've lapsed.
Just
That's
the one
not,
who he puts up with the railway model.
I live with one.
right. Okay. Well, that's
See, nearly 100%.
It's a lot of people's penalty, yeah.
That's very good.
But it's interesting because, I mean, we're going to hear from Lawrence at the Model Railway Club fairly soon, actually. I should keep an eye on the time. In fact, gosh, we're 20
Are we
minutes
keeping him
over.
waiting?
I'm 20 minutes over. Lawrence is, hang on, if you're watching Lawrence, I'm really sorry. Let me just, he's there, Lawrence is there. Lawrence, hang on, I've got to press a few buttons to get you on, mate. Hold on. Lawrence has just been sat there patiently and I didn't even notice he was here.
He's a railway modeler. He'll be patient a little bit.
Hang on, well, the railway modellers are very patient, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's part of the
They
course.
can explode.
He's been sat there itching to tell you that Thomas the Tank Engine and the Railway Children is... Lawrence, hello, how are you? Speak to us, please.
Good
Hang
evening,
on.
Nick. Good evening, Ludlow, and good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be invited along to talk to you tonight.
Fantastic. So you're from the Model Railway Club, which is that like the oldest railway club in the world or something, isn't it?
It is. We have been in existence for 111 years. In fact, our minute book shows that we had to terminate a meeting because of a Zeppelin raid. So we have been around a good while. Various famous modelers, including Wilma Audrey, Pete Waterman, of course, and a few others. And I heard you
Pete
mention
Waterman a member,
P4
is he?
just now. Fine scale's entirely right. Basically, Hornby cheated at about 16.5 millimeters. Everybody then realised that was wrong, so they went to EM, which is slightly wider. But no, P4 is exactly right for 4 millimeters to 4 foot 8¼ inches, which comes in, I think, 18.82.
You're losing us now, mate, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting very technical.
But never get hung up on the scale, because it's really about the joy. And we have a junior section that's been running a few years now called Young MRC, and it goes back to that wonderful picture you showed of you and your father, Nick. We invite the parent and the child to come together. They can have a chance at painting something, building something, soldering something, running something on the track, whether they've bought it or made it, and then working together to build their own railway in their own landscape. And it's been an enormous success. We have boys, we have girls, mums, dads, grandparents attending, and it really, really works very well.
So what is the format of your club, Lawrence?
The format of the club is we now have 3 sections. First of all, the normal membership, which is 18 plus. Then we have Young MRC, which is parent and child, runs on Saturdays, 2 houses. And now we're bringing in the gap in the middle for the 12 to 18-year-olds, and we're trying to design a railway apprenticeship. Because as you say, there's an entire curriculum in this subject. There's geography, history, maths, science, engineering, just for openers. And as you walk through all of this, you learn so much about life that then gives you skills that take forward in adulthood.
Can't disagree with that. How do you counter the challenge we heard earlier that Simon mentioned? He's 12, up to the age of 12, his daughter was trained mad, and then she got a mobile phone and it was all over. I mean, how do you counter
It
that?
happens.
What's your strategy for that as the world leading authority in engaging young people in model railways?
We're not the world leading authority, and I would be
Okay, well, Pete
upsetting a
Waterman
few of
is,
my
but-
colleagues in other clubs if I said I was. But yes, there is occasionally a gap. Girls sometimes drop out at about 12, 14. The boys suddenly decide that they don't want to spend their money on model railways because they want to spend it on cars, girls, and beer occasionally. So there tends to be a gap. But people adopt their hobby for life by the age of about 10 or 11. And even if they go away, they still come back. Now, I was involved 4 years ago in a completely mad project. We were asked by a certain TV station to build a model railway, 72 miles long, between Fort William and Inverness, and to run a real steam locomotive across it in just a fortnight. I won't spoil it, but from that, people have gone on to be network rail engineers, building roads in Tibet, water systems in West Africa, working also for the railways in a whole variety of jobs in this country, and being exceptional engineers. Ladies and gentlemen, so this is a hobby that we will walk with you for as much or as little of your life as you want it to.
So what's this 72-mile long railway? I'm trying to understand that a little bit more. Give me
Well, if you look at your map, you'll see Fort William on the west coast of Scotland. Very popular because one of our great recruiting sergeants these days is Harry Potter, who, bless him, goes to school by train. The Hogwarts Express runs over that wonderful curved viaduct built by Bill McAlpine in concrete. And of course you can travel on it twice a day through the summer months. But the original building was a canal that heads northeast from Fort William, crosses through the hills, Loch Ness, and ends up in the capital in Inverness. Originally, when the railways came, they was going to build a railway, but it didn't get built. So they said, let's build it. Except that engineers take years and move the landscape around. The Scots wouldn't let us move any landscape. So there we are, in midge-infested country, in the rain, in the pine woods, building 72 miles of track, literally uphill and down dale, and trying to get this wonderful little steam locomotive that's about yay big, called Silver Lady, along the line. And 58 of us were out there in all weathers to try and achieve that goal. I won't spoil the ending because it's still out there on E4, but it was an amazing experience.
And what was that called? That sounds a little bit like the what's his name? The May guy. What's his name? Who does the Top Gear chap? James May. Yeah, didn't he do something a bit like that?
James May built 4mm down in the West Country. We were under Dick Strawbridge of the Chateau, and we were using real steam.
Real steam. Wow. I've seen
But
you guys.
you were talking about how to get kids into the hobby. Now, Hornby looked at lockdown and tried a very odd idea. Previously, you bought a train set and that was it. They introduced what was called the family hamper. And in here was not just the track and the train, but the weathering materials, kits to build for the station, houses, signalling, so that you were actually building not a train set, but a model railway. And it has sold by the bucket.
Really?
Now, this will probably offend my good colleague, and he's a scratch building. And I totally accept that there is nothing more satisfying than building your own loco and seeing it running. I would also say to people that one of the best ways of saving money is to go to exhibitions and have a good rummage in the second-hand stock, because you'll find bargains in there with which a little bit of engineering, tweaking and painting will give you something that is unique to you at maybe only a quarter of the price of new.
Fair enough. That's the way to go. I remember seeing you guys at a big model railway exhibition in Alexandra Palace, actually, and you had a fantastic layout there, based on the part of London that you're in, and I think it was Copenhagen Fields, wasn't it?
It is
Tell
indeed.
us
Now
about
that's
that
been in the
layout.
build for 40 years. And on the 10th and 11th of July, we are allowing people to come to the club in limited numbers, meet Tim Watson, our president, go backstage and actually drive this layout. And
Wow.
this won BRM Model of the Year in 2019.
It's an incredible layout, isn't it? It really is remarkable. So that took 40 years to build.
40 years and we're still building.
Good Lord. I used to have an office up on United House on North Road, actually, which is the old Coachworks, which is just up there, actually. I used to love looking at this model. And you're extending it a little bit more, are you?
We're extending and we're going underneath. There will be a tube train underneath the road that you just saw there.
1 to 450 scale.
So below here, you'll see one of the tube stations in this road. There'll be another tube station at the other end. And there'll be scaled tube trains running between the two
One end of the
stations.
layout, and Peterborough and the rest of the world.
Fantastic.
But there is another fantastic layout coming to the Ludlow area. I mentioned Pete Waterman earlier, and he and our colleagues from Manchester Model Railway Society are installing in Chester Cathedral a 74-foot long double O gauge layout. That is being unveiled on the 16th of July, and it will be open throughout the summer till September. So if you're in the Ludlow area and you can make the short hop up to Chester, you'll see something that is really quite unique.
And how long is that going to be there for, Lawrence?
From the 16th of July through to the 19th of September, I believe.
Fantastic. Well, that's amazing. I mean, the standard of the model making is absolutely superb. I mean, it really is wonderful to see. I'm delighted you could join us. Are people able to access your club between exhibitions? I mean, is that an option? Do you have open days, open nights out of COVID?
We have open days about 2 or 3 times a year. We're open to membership and hopefully guests as COVID relaxes every Thursday evening. But one of the ways we've tried to lead is by actually making inclusion through digital archives. We have monthly lectures from famous lecturers. Those are now going up on YouTube, so that you can either join them live or see them after the event. And one I would recommend is a fantastic lecture called Brass, Fire and Steam, given by Ant Cools from the National Model Railway, the National Railway Museum, I apologise, in York and Shilton. He's curated an exhibition that's currently at the Science Museum, and the youngest loco is older than our club. It covers the 100 years from 1800 to 1900. Now, we're used to the idea that you make a model of a large loco, but in those days some of those models were actually prototypes. It was the engineer trying to work out how to make something in miniature which you could then scale up. And they're wonderful things. No standard gauges, no standard designs, just unique models that, built in brass, can be fired and steamed and run.
Fantastic. No, it's amazing. I'm going to be connecting with you when I get back to London, absolutely, and try and get along to an evening. You mentioned Pete Waterman. I mean, I've done a bit of DJing in my time, so I loved his music, and he actually generously did a small film for us at an event we did in Coventry on a cardboard Coventry Cathedral a few weeks ago, because he's from Coventry. So you've got that celebrity there that can hopefully help you connect this hobby, this history, this cultural project with the future generations. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really, really grateful to you for your time, and look forward to catching up again. Thank you very much. We'll see you again very soon.
Nick,
hopefully.
I wish you, the Ludlow Festival, and Steam & Co. every success.
Bless you. Thank you very much, Lawrence. It means a lot. Cheers.
Good
mate.
night.
Bye-bye. Well, thank you, Simon. That's some little connection, isn't it? Fantastic. I'd like to get Keith up, actually.
Yeah.
Andrew Donis was supposed to be on now, but it was. Yeah, we can catch up afterwards. Just going to drop that off there. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Keith actually, I think, brought some of his locos along, haven't you? Keith, do you want to join us? Now I'm going to change the battery in that GoPro, which has just died. So I'm going to disconnect my microphone for a second. I think I'll just run the sting for a second. Hold on a second.
I don't have a book to sell.
Don't you think?
Well, desperately trying to find 30 seconds to change the battery in a GoPro, which is easier said than done sometimes.
Do you want to be talking to this or anything?
Yeah, that's talking into that, Keith.
Just
that's
blah,
absolutely
blah,
right.
blah, blah.
We can
1,
hear
2,
you.
3, 4.
We've got a good level there.
Can you hear me?
So, Keith, welcome. Welcome to the Art of Trains. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
You generously provided some live steam on our virtual visit to Ludlow.
Yeah, it was a bit of a dash, but we managed this fine.
It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. Tell everybody what you've got at home and what you get up to, because I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Well, I suppose I should start at the beginning, really, because I enjoyed my job very much, and I started out years and years and years ago when I was about 7 making models, and that sort of carried on. I had early Airfix kits, which never quite worked out exactly how I wanted them to. In fact, I was making an aeroplane, and I couldn't understand why it looked like a submarine once. It was because it was a submarine that it looked. Anyway, later on, I sort of acquired an in-law who, I seem to be here by myself now, acquired an in-law who ran a model railway industry, making wheels and fittings for railway models. And so it seemed sensible for me to take that up. And so I did. And as I say, it was a lovely sort of release from the stress and tension of my job. And after a while, of course, making the model railways took over rather more than the job. So you bought a few locomotives? Well, I've bought 2.
Okay.
One. I don't. Do you want me to put it out so you can see?
Absolutely, I'd love to. Yeah.
Is this secure?
Not terribly. What might be better?
I do need something to just sort of sit it on. What about over here?
Yeah. Let's bring this table across then.
Should I just move? Well. Oh, okay. Right. Can I just put this down? Or?
Yep, you can, although we won't hear you, so.
This is a model that I made, I don't know, about 15 years ago, I suppose. It was a bit of a challenge because it's a very small boiler. It's made of copper, brass, steel, all of those traditional metals, and runs off steam. There's a meths filler at the back here, and there's a water tank there with a pump. So you pump the water through into the boiler, you light the meths, and hope it steams up, and it usually does. There's a pressure gauge. I don't know if you're familiar with this particular model. It's of a Midland Railway. I don't know where Simon's gone. I do make Great Western as well, just to please him.
I should hope so too.
I love the Great Western. It's a Midland Railway, and it was designed by a man called Johnson. It had a bogie at the front and a little trailing pair here, and in the centre here was one wheel which was well over 7 foot in diameter, so it's something like 2.5 meters, and that was the main driving force. Quite naturally, it was difficult for it to gain traction, and so unless the driver was really steady how he opened the regulator, it would just slip on the tracks, and it would whiz around at an alarming speed. And they did become known as Midland spinners because of this, rather than anything else. But I like this particular period. There's other people have said, I think Mr. Woolmer said the same thing. This was a time when the technology was very exciting. They were trying things out all the time. So with all the varying railway companies, they each had their own style, their own liveries, which were very, very beautiful, highly ornate, and very decorative. So, and I find that it's the same in all technologies, really, that right at the beginning, when people are trying to establish a design, a way forward, it's frequently quite fascinating. And the variety of locos from this period is huge. I mean, they've all got different configurations of wheel, the boiler size, firebox, so on and so forth. So that they're just a lovely thing to make, I think.
It is beautiful, isn't it? Really is a lovely loco, although I struggle to really engage with the LMS.
It isn't LMS.
Oh, it's not
Midland,
LMS.
It's Midland
Well,
Railway.
well, a predecessor, yeah.
Yes.
I presume that merged into the LMS, did it?
Yes,
Yeah,
it merged
yeah.
into it. Yes.
I'm very particular, but it's lovely, it's beautiful. and you scratch built that, and
It's a scratch-built loco. Yes.
and that's fueled with
Methylated
with
spirits.
meths.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
I
yeah.
do have one that's coal-fired, but it's a bit big for me to bring.
Bit of a fiddle. Yeah, I seem to remember seeing that when we were.
Yeah,
up
they're
at
quite
yours.
they're quite difficult to steam up. I'm not a enormously skilled coal firer. But, I mean, some people. It is very, very difficult. You think you've got a tiny little hole, when you've got to, get that alight in the first place and keep it alight. It's quite
Yeah.
it's quite a challenge, quite a skill.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How long did that take you to make?
Do you know, I can't. It must be about 3 or 4 months, probably. Yeah.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Gosh.
That's all I did. I
Right.
didn't go to sleep or anything.
And,
Didn't go to the pub.
and you've actually still got a wife as well, which is remarkable.
Just about.
Did she go backpacking for 3 months?
Well, she's as bad, really. I mean, it was her father who got me into this
Really?
crazy business. Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well, he ran, as I said, this small model engineering business, and so it seemed politic for me to spend time doing that.
And how much of that is actually scratch built, or are you buying any of the components as castings?
There are one or
something?
two, yes.
And I don't mean to sort of
It's
accuse you of
I
cheating.
think I probably
or
bought.
anything.
I think the water pump.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Well, that's fair enough. So you're making the wheels from chunks of metal.
You buy the castings,
Right.
and then you machine them to whatever
Right.
diameter that you need. So there's a lot of lathe work, obviously, and milling.
To expect you to run a foundry would be quite a tall order, I presume, wouldn't it? Really?
No, I didn't run a foundry. No.
No.
I made patents for foundries, but no.
And you've got children or had children?
I do. I have a son.
And what sort of interest have you had from him? And did
Well,
it fall off a
it
cliff
falls
like
into the
everything else?
category of the earliest. I think was it Simon or somebody was saying that it's a great interest up until the age of about 10 or 11, and then other things sort of take over a little bit. Exams, schoolwork. He hasn't quite got to girls and beer yet, but his time has gone into those other things, really. I'm getting heckled from the audience here.
Fairly typical, I think, isn't it?
I have brought another engine, which this is obviously a very serious model and requires a great deal of time, energy and equipment to make, to say nothing of a bit of skill. But I have another model here which I made specifically for my son when he was 6. And
I think it's having devoted 3 months to that. It sounds to me like just any excuse, to be quite honest.
no, it isn't.
This looks like a lot of fun. It's not Ivor, is it? No.
No.
Wow. Fantastic.
This is Ranald, which is one of my son's names. But it's made of wood, just scraps of wood. It has an electric motor underneath. The battery is in there. These are the controls. You simply put it on a Gauge-O track and split it, and off it goes. There's the guard's van has got a potbelly stove and a cat, and there's a beer mug somewhere and various other things. So, you know, it was nice sort of
Is that
fun.
Guards Van modelled on anything? Or
No, I just made
just
it
a
up.
fantasy
Yeah,
and
just
dream
made it
project.
up,
That's
yeah.
wonderful. See, that is pure imagination, pure creativity. There's a little bit of chitty chitty bang bang in there, isn't
Yes,
there?
yeah.
And,
This is the end of some spoons, some silver spoons, and then this is out of a Christmas cracker, and you know, it's all a bit like that, really.
that's really is absolutely fantastic.
I just thought it is a very, you know, it is a very serious, dry business. I mean, they're not the most exciting thing for people to look at unless you've got a real love of locomotives. Then they don't really mean a lot to people. But something like this is something that most people could probably manage with with a saw and a chisel and a few bits and pieces and a pot of glue. So.
That's lovely. I bought a couple of bodies with just the chassis with the wheels and a motor, and it didn't even have a battery pack, and I built bodies for the boys on a 32mm narrow gauge garden railway I had in a place.
Yes,
which,
I remember.
which
I
was
think
fun.
talked about that.
Yeah, a bit of a cheat, but that's lovely. I've got one of my locos in the camper van. I don't know where I'd put it actually, otherwise I'd dig it out. But because there's a firm in Church Stretton, isn't there, that makes or imports live steam locos. What are they called? Can you remember? The loco we've got is called Caradoc. AccuCast or something like that. It's one of the big.
There's AccuCraft,
Is it
but they're
them?
in Pontrilas.
It's not them. Let me look it
No.
up. No.
Okay, they're
But,
Pontrilas. I thought
perhaps
Simon would know. What's the company in Much Wenlock? There's a no. You know the man.
Do I?
Yes.
It's a bit echoey, so
Okay. You know the man. And he runs. Is it Much Wenlock that he's at?
I don't know.
I think his name is Lawrence.
Oh, right.
You've told me about it.
Oh, Nick. Copy. Yeah. Nick Copy.
I think the answer is we don't know.
Yes.
I'd love to know where my loco is. I'm going to go and get something. I've got to see you and raise you. Just keep talking to people. What's your fondest railway moments with your son when he was in the zone? There you go. Tell everybody about that.
I don't think I have one.
Really?
It was just sort of did it though.
Very echoey.
It is echoey, isn't it? Well, if I talk to you like this, you can hear me. That's okay. If I use this, it doesn't work, does it? No. I suppose to tell you my favourite moment with a railway and my son. I can't think of one really. It's just one of those things that you do, and some days are really magical, aren't they? The weather's bright and everything just happens. Other times it's
So this is my railway box.
Thank you. That's free.
Where my headphones went. So this is my railway box, and this is. I had a tiny bedroom, so all my stuff was N-gauge.
Oh,
so
right.
that's
I
my
see,
whole
yes.
collection in there.
Yeah.
Don't know if we can zoom in on that.
Anne's building what's your 009, Anne's building?
Oh, I used to love 009. That's the narrow
009.
gauge.
She's built a beautiful
Oh, have you?
one. Beautiful
Oh, I'd love
layout.
to come and see that. That's
really
a lovely
lovely.
format.
Really lovely.
This the only trouble with N-gauge, I could never actually get it working. So this is a die-cast kit
Oh, yes.
of
Yeah.
a GWR loco carriage thing. I forget what they call that. Like a DMU.
A rail car.
Rail car.
Yeah, I want to build one of those. They're really lovely.
And my goodness, it was hard to build it. So, well, all you had to do was actually just glue 6
Yeah.
bits of lead together. But my goodness, I never got that working.
Yeah.
I've got a loco there, a little mini trick thing, which I always remember seeing that in the toy shop. Does anybody remember the toy shop in the Bullring?
Yes.
They used to, was it Wainwright's?
I can't remember. No,
It was right on the corner.
That's right.
And I remember seeing this in the shop window and I bought it. It was that and a looper track. That got me into N-Gauge and I regret it to this day. Mr. Chisholm used to have TT, which is 3mm, and that was a good format. And I think you're better off having a 12-inch, a short length of double O track than tons of N-Gauge that doesn't work. Anyway, that's my gripe. That's my therapy done. So,
no, my building has been almost exclusively gauge 1, which is what, that one is a gauge 1.
That's gauge 1, is it? That's
Yeah.
not O gauge.
No, it's gauge 1.
What's
gauge
the track? What's the track distance? on that?
30, I don't know, 35 or 36 millimeters. I
But O
I
gauge
just
is
put it
32.
on it and run it.
Is
I don't have any
Is O
gra-
gauge 32?
That is 10 millimeters to the foot as a scale.
Right. As
And
opposed to
then
8,
the fine
or
scale
4.
is 32.
Right.
Anyway.
We're in danger of a rambling end to this, I think, aren't we?
Yeah, we are really. No.
Sir, I mean, what's your? You said you're a railway modeller. What? Yeah, that's his wife. That's Keith's wife over there. But
I've just got one of these tail chasers in a spare bedroom.
okay,
So much, it's taken up so much room. There's not room really for anything else.
what does tail chaser mean? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by tail chaser?
We know just 2 circuits
Okay,
with lots of tracks, lots of sidings on the inside and the outside. It's modeled on an area of Hull called Wilmington. The railways used to go to Hornsey and Withensey on the coast. There was also a lot of docks traffic. So it's totally goods. Plus, they're just more interesting to me than coaches.
right. So it's a goods
Yeah,
layout.
they're inefficient, but they're just visually more interesting.
So you've built a goods layout, really? Right. Okay, it's interesting. And is there a community in Ludlow of railway modellers, or is this the first time you've all actually been under one roof together?
Model railway club in Craven Arms.
Well, I contacted the Model Railway Club in Craven Arms because I remember exhibiting there years ago with a little tram layout I built, which was a loop of track and a little shoebox that the tram went through with a diorama behind it, which I think I did at about 2 days' notice. But
Nothing's changed there.
Yeah, but I tell you what, it's quite exciting to build something and exhibit and people come and see it. There's a film which I commend to you all about education and how it might change to a project-based approach called Most Likely to Succeed. And it's they have a project which they run through the year and then have a big exhibition. And the whole ethos of this school is making something that wasn't there before that people come to see, which is model railway exhibitions basically, isn't it? And I contacted the Model Railway Club of Craven Arms, and the chairman or whatever couldn't make it, and I did ask if he could extend the invitation, but I didn't get the impression that happened, because there used to be layouts and exhibitions in the Methodist Hall, didn't there? Were they organised by the Ludlow?
They've also been in the Bishop Haskell Centre, and now when they happened, it was pre-COVID, there were 2 exhibitions a year, so spring and summer, and they've got the race course.
And who organised those?
Craven Arms Model
Oh, so Craven Arms organised exhibitions in Ludlow, did they? Probably more of an audience to come for them then. Right.
I think the thing with Craven Arms is it's a big venue with lots of parking.
So it's a bit easy. So people from Ludlow are members there, are they?
Well, it's only 2 miles up the road.
Yeah.
You can cycle there.
But I always, when I lived in Ludlow, people just used to fight everybody from other towns and villages. So they're making model railways together, which is, maybe that's the peacemaker, the olive branch.
I think we tend to be somewhat insular as well on the whole, because if you engage, it requires an awful lot of time sitting in one room, finding or making or doing
When
something.
I wanted to build a railway, my wife was encouraging me, and I kept trying to say to her, apart from the expense, it's actually anti-social. So when you're up there, and sometimes now I'll go up there just for some quarter of an hour, and it's 2.5 hours later.
Yeah. But funny enough, I was chatting to somebody the other day who is a railway. Well, I was actually sitting in the Castle Square because I slept in Castle Square on Saturday night in a camper van, and a guy came walking past, and I said, "Oh, it's Jeff, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah, how did you know my name?" Because I thought it was the person I'd met the night before, whose name wasn't Jeff, as it happened. So again, serendipitous lightning bolt strike. But he was a mad railway modeller, and he does it with a friend on 6 days a week, so it's very social for him. But what was interesting was that he does it with a guy who virtually invented high-pressure steam boilers, a chap in Cornwall apparently. So he's like this Bissell or somebody. Do you know the name Bissell? So some guy who's synonymous with the best boilers in the land apparently. So yeah, I've had a bit of a railway train week. Should we knock it on the head and finish another beer? Have we got anything else to add to the general ramble of our Art of Trains evening?
Oh, fine.
Any observations? We got there in the end, didn't we? Yeah. Andrew Adonis hasn't connected with us, unfortunately.
Hasn't he?
Oh, hang on, here he is. What does he say? No one is picking up. Oh, hang on, he's there. Let's have a look. 5 minutes ago. I'm going to give him another link. Let's see if we can get Andrew Adonis on. That would be a rebel-rousing end to the night. Hold on a second. Give him the link that worked for Lawrence. Oh. Let's end with a bit of, see if it'd be quite nice to end with Andrew actually.
Do you want to see this? Yes, because you won't. It won't come out very often. You'll be finished with me, sir.
Would you like to chat with Andrew Adonis with me when he comes on? Andrew Adonis, quick. Adonis.
No.
Adonis, yeah. Great. Let's see if we can get him on. You can come. You can come and. Well, he was only 5 minutes ago. He said he was trying to get on. I usually have a production system. But I didn't have any budget, and I had a son came with me, and he didn't last very long. I can. Yeah, or someone can come up, whatever works, yeah. Sorry about the pause here. We're just waiting to see if we can get Andrew Adonis. 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. Hello, Andrew. I'm just going to get rid of that. And let me just pull this up here.
I don't know what happened to the other link, Nick, but I was...
I'm sorry about that, Andrew. We seem to, maybe there's a browser issue or something, not to worry. Lovely to see you. Well, thanks for joining us tonight.
Not at all. Great to be with you. Am I in a meeting? Am I in the festival?
We're actually in the goods shed that you see there, and yep. I'm going to sort of press a button and put myself here.
Great.
And then I'm going to press another button and see if I can't put you up somewhere sort of there. Oh, that's not you. That's no good, is it? We're... there we go. Hello,
Great.
welcome. We got there in the end.
I can see myself in 2 screens, on mine and on yours.
Oh, you've got your self view as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
You could have just you if you wanted to, but I'm sure you've got enough of you at the moment. So how are you doing?
All well. I've just been chairing the executive of the European movement, so another cause dear to our hearts.
Of course, you've got quite a few. You've got a few causes up your sleeve, haven't you?
So what's been going on so far?
So basically, we had a fantastic chat with Christian Walmer, who I'm sure you know very well. We were talking about the cultural significance of the railways, the inspiration that they bring to young people and old people alike. He ended talking about his electric car view, which isn't really one, that it's not really going anywhere, which is his perspective. What are your thoughts about railways, trains? You know the work we do around inspiring young people and also connecting communities, so working at a number of levels. What's your angle on railways? I know you were a transport minister once, and you've not let that go. You're very passionate. You're chair of the group until recently. What are your thoughts around this area?
Well, it's basically been a great 20 years for the railways. There's been a massive expansion in numbers using the trains. I mean, numbers have roughly doubled in the last 20 years, and just at the point where people thought that maybe railways were never going to be the future, they took off in a big way. So it's fantastic. The only bad news story of the last 20 years, apart from, of course, COVID, which has been a disaster for the last year, but before then, is that fares were very high. And there you can get decent bargains on advanced fares. Standard fares are very high, and I think that's off-putting to new passengers, as well as dissuading, of course, existing ones. And you should never lose sight of the fact that half the population virtually never use trains. And I think part of the reason is that half the population tend not to travel so much, but it's also because fares are high. But there's also a problem of connectivity, particularly in rural areas. 2 big things that are changing, though, and one big thing I'd like to see change. We're getting lots more metro systems, which is fantastic. Big, city, London transport type systems. London itself has had a huge resurgence of metro travel in the last 20 years. The building of Crossrail, the London Overground, the doubling in the frequency of the tube, all of that, which is fantastic. And when Crossrail opens, that alone will add 10% to London transport capacity and get the metro underground system extending right out to Reading in the west and Turnfield in the east. And we're now seeing similar metro type systems being developed in Birmingham, in Manchester, the 2 next largest cities in England. And that's fantastic too. And we want to see that increase. Only this morning I was chatting to people in Leeds who want to see a metro system in Leeds, which is another big city that doesn't have one, and we need to see that taken forward. That's good piece of news number 1. Good piece of news number 2 is the development of HS2, which means for the first time we'll get decent high-speed rail in England, except until now we've only had it for the Channel Tunnel Rail link, which is called High Speed 1, which is London to Folkestone, then connecting into the French high-speed network in Calais. But HS2, which is now being constructed between London and Birmingham and is due to go all the way up to Manchester and then to Leeds, connecting with the West Coast Main Line at Manchester and the East Coast Main Line near York, that will transform connectivity between our major cities and give us high-speed rail between our major cities for the first time. We're a generation behind most of the rest of Europe in doing that. The French opened their first high-speed lines in 1981, the Italians in the 1970s, the Japanese in the 1960s, but nonetheless, we're getting there. The bit that we haven't really made much progress on so far that I'd like to see more on is reopening closed beaching lines, where we closed far too much of the rail network in the 1960s, including a lot of quite large towns. Towns like, I could go through the list, but places like Cirencester, like Ilfracombe, as I would go through it by region, which lost their rail connections completely in the 1960s. And I'd like to see a much bolder programme of reopening, beaching, closed lines, particularly to larger towns. And that's just starting. You know, the Oxford to Cambridge line that was closed in 1969 is now reopening in stages. It's already reopened between London, between Oxford, Bicester and Milton Keynes, but the plan is now to get it all the way through to Cambridge. We need a steady stream of proposals like that, which reverse the worst of the beaching closures in respect of large towns, so that young people and people everywhere in larger settlements get the benefits of rail. I mention young people because the research that's been done showed that young people don't like living in towns which don't have rail connections, and towns which were of a similar size in the 1960s, those which kept their rail connections have by and large grown in size, whereas those that lost their rail connections have by and large reduced in size, and they've had a particular problem keeping young people and young families. So it's a pretty good news story for the last 20 years, but we shouldn't be complacent. We should welcome HS2 and what's happening with high-speed rail. We should welcome the growth in new metro systems in our cities, but we really need to get much more bold in reopening beaching closures. There you are. Those are my thoughts for your festival.
It's interesting. There was a project down in Devon actually to convert. Are they opening up Oakhampton, aren't they? Exeter Oakhampton. That's
an absolutely classic case of a line closure that should never have happened. The fact that Oakhampton and Tavistock and Ilfracombe are without rail stations, you know, that needs to be changed.
And that's classic beaching casualty from the old days, isn't it?
Yeah.
What HS2, I mean, a lot of the criticism seems to be around the excessive cost of that, the big numbers. I mean, how, in a nutshell, do the economics add up and justify that? And that's not a poison question, it's a devil's advocate, if nothing else.
Well, the economics definitely add up because we're talking about the largest cities in the country. And if you're not going to build high-speed rail, you're going to have to completely reconstruct their Victorian railway lines to increase capacity, which is hugely expensive. And we did an upgrade of the West Coast Main Line only 10 years ago, finished, and that cost 10 billion. And that got only limited additional capacity. But there is, of course, a big problem in big infrastructure projects in this country that they always go over budget and they take far too long. HS2 isn't unusual in that respect. The rebuilding of Birmingham New Street Station was exactly the same. It was 3 times over budget and took twice too long. It'd be great if we were better at doing infrastructure so that we didn't get those cost and time overruns. But and that is a problem with HS2 because the costs are now going up, you know, into the high tens of billions. But I don't think that's a reason for not doing it. That's a reason for getting the costs under control, not for trying to deny the future.
I mean, that's down to good project management as much anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right.
And so the justification is there is not sufficient capacity, environmental considerations, economic boosts, spreading the wealth, levelling it out across the country, all those reasons really. So
all of those. And speed does matter because it improves connectivity. The evidence suggests that people are by and large prepared to commute an hour in each way when they're doing regular commuting, whether that be daily or, you know, once or twice a week, because of course an hour means you can get to a place and back comfortably within a day. And the reason why the speed of HS2 matters is it dramatically increases the range of places that can be reached within an hour from each of our major cities, helped by the fact that by high-speed rail, London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds, which are our 4 biggest conurbations, can all be reached within an hour of each other by high-speed rail in a way they can't by conventional rail. By HS2, Manchester and Leeds are an hour from London, Birmingham is half an hour from London, and Manchester and Leeds are both half an hour from Birmingham. Whereas at the moment, Birmingham is an hour and a half from London, Manchester and Leeds are both 2.25 hours from London, and Manchester and Leeds, because our regional connections are so bad, are an hour and a half just from Birmingham. So HS2 is really important in telescoping the sense of distance between our cities, and that will give a huge boost to economic activity and mobility between our major conurbations, but doing so in a thoroughly green way, without building new motorways and without having more domestic aviation. So there's a big and well thought out economic, social and environmental case between HS2. You're right to say, Nick, that the costs of balloons may need to be got under control. But the only point I'd make on that is any infrastructure you put in, you probably be subject to a similar proportionate increase in costs. And we need to get better at delivering infrastructure across the piece.
Fair enough. I think the elephant in the room, you've mentioned lots of northern cities, Leeds, Manchester. The elephant in the room for me is Liverpool. Why is Liverpool not in that frame?
Well, Liverpool would get high-speed trains. It would be just again about an hour from London. The high-speed line would go to Crewe, and then just north of Crewe, I think it's called Goldbourne Junction, there will be a fork-off towards Liverpool. Now, the current plan is that that last stretch, that last 15 miles or so, would be on the existing lines, but you could build a high-speed line all the way through to Liverpool. And if you did that, that would get the journey time down to the same journey time from London as Manchester. It would be a bit more at the moment because the last bit's on conventional lines. But Liverpool will get huge gains from high-speed rail at the moment because it will get direct high-speed services and they would go most of the way on the high-speed line. Liverpool also, of course, needs east-west connectivity as well. And the other plan for what's sometimes called HS3 would be for a high-speed line that goes Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, York, Hull. So with Bradford in there too, between Manchester and Leeds. And I think that's a really important plan as well. Because in the north, you've got a problem with north-south connection. You've also got an equally big problem of east-west connections.
It's funny because friends of mine in Liverpool have sort of suspected that it's almost a government plot against them to sort of spite Liverpool for not including them in this infrastructure. Do you think there's any merit in that?
I don't think so. No, of course, Manchester's a much larger city, which is the reason why the proposal was to take the high-speed line right into Manchester. But Liverpool would get the through high-speed trains. The line would go most of the way to Liverpool, so it would be about 10 minutes slower than to Manchester, but you'd still get the same high-speed 2 trains. And as I say, I think a strong candidate for the next investment after building the line into Manchester would be to build the high-speed line all the way through to Liverpool as well.
Okay.
That would require the big building, though, of Liverpool Lime Street Station, because the problem is Lime Street Station at the moment couldn't take more trains than it's got at the moment, so you'd have to rebuild the station too.
Is that platform capacity or length?
Yeah.
Platform capacity.
Well, they'll have to lengthen the platforms anyway to take the high-speed 2 trains, but they would need more platforms if you were to build a dedicated line.
So enough of the politics and policy stuff. Let's park all that nonsense. Is this just a job for you? Is this just something that you believe passionately in because it's an economic driver and it's a policy thing? And I know you are the definition of a policy wonk, if you don't mind me using the W word there. Do you have a passion and an interest for railways growing up as a young person? Does it float your boat, as they say?
Yeah, I used to be a train spotter. I went to Boreham Wood Station on the line from St Pancras, as then was, now St Pancras International, through to Bedford. I used to watch all of the old diesel trains, diesel multiple units that used to be on the commuter lines, and I think it was class 45s that used to go on the main line up to Sheffield and Nottingham. So I was a train spotter, but my great passion has always been to improve timetables. I was fascinated by railway timetables. I used to collect them as a boy and always sought to improve them. I always thought that the trains could be more frequent and faster, and I wrote my own version of the All Systems timetable, with whatever it was, all
by the age of 5 or something, was it?
So, yeah, I'm afraid I was a heavy-duty train enthusiast, and I still am. And for me, the job I wanted when I was 13, the job I wanted above all others, was to be chairman of British Rail.
Oh, really?
A job held by a guy called Sir Peter Parker, who I took to be an extraordinary human being. Well, British Rail had been abolished by the time I grew up, but I became Secretary of State for Transport, which I suppose was the second best.
How long did you hold that role for?
I was Secretary of State for a year,
right.
And then my party lost the election. Otherwise, I would have liked to have done it for a lot longer.
Right. Okay.
But it was time enough to get the plans for HS2 developed, and also big plans for electrification, including the electrification of the Great Western, all the way out to Bristol and Newbury and into South Wales. And I'm very proud of that, and I think we need to expand electrification of our main lines too, which is both green and makes them much faster and more efficient.
But you were chair of your party, it's not a parliamentary group, the Transport Committee, weren't you?
Yes, the National Infrastructure Commission. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that was after I left government. I did that in the mid-2010s.
You stepped down from that. So this brings us back to what SteamCo is all about, because we don't have strategy, we don't have railways if people don't want to do it for a job, for a career. What's the challenge facing this country, inspiring our kids not just to be railway modelers, but to want to be engineers, to be creatives, to design bridges, tunnels? What do you think the challenges are for that? Because I know you've got a passion for education and education policy. Could you share some thoughts on that?
Well, we need to do the sciences and maths better in schools, because of course that's essential to doing engineering. So we need to improve the quality of teaching and opportunities. But in terms of career decisions that young people take, I think having big and exciting projects really inspires young people. And HS2, you've got those big tunnel boring machines on. There's lots of online and social media material on it. The same with Crossrail, with its 2 tunnel boring machines, these huge state-of-the-art new stations and trains and all that. This is genuinely exciting. And after, as I said, the best part of 100 years when railways were in decline, and there weren't big and exciting new projects for young people to see. Now that we've got those and they can see them, I think we need to do more presentations of them in schools. HS2 need to get into schools and do presentations, what's actually happening on the construction of this first high-speed line across the country, the tunnel boring machines, the hundreds of bridges, the state-of-the-art stations, the fantastic trains that look like Japanese bullet trains, all of those things. And I think that, young teenagers and so on will be hugely inspired by this, and it may encourage more of them to want to become engineers and to want to go into the transport industries. So I think those of us who are in the transport sector need to think much more imaginatively about how we present these projects now that they exist to young people so they become excited by them. And hopefully that will lead to a lot of them wanting to go into the engineering and transport sectors themselves, not just boys, but also girls, and having women role models. Because there are lots of senior women engineers now, and people who run transport companies who are women. That's also very important too. So it isn't just seen as a boy thing. When I was standing on the edge of Boreham Wood Station back in the 1970s, there were never any girls at all. It was very much a boy thing. And but modern engineering is, I think, offers so many opportunities. Well, you touched such on high skill that we need to be selling it much more widely.
Sorry, you touched on the science and maths there, obviously core subjects. STEM gets a lot of focus. We started SteamCo partly because of the STEAM thing with A, but for me it's about creativity and inspiration in all its forms. At the moment we're on a UK tour called the Inspired to Learn Tour, because if our kids aren't inspired, if we're just force feeding facts and knowledge and rote learning, kids aren't going to engage. They're going to get out as soon as they can and just not have that interest. What are your thoughts around the curriculum? I mean, 10 years of Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings' education policy. What are your thoughts around that and that narrowing of the curriculum that so many in the creative industries are so against?
Well, I think it's very important that you get the basics right. People need to be able to do the 3 hours, but you also want a much broader curriculum too, including much more opportunity for engagement, school visits. It's been a big issue, of course, particularly with COVID, where there have been almost none. Getting school visits out there so people can go and see the great sites. They can go and visit Iron Bridge, they can see the industrial history as well as the modern stuff. I've got my backdrop here, which I hope you can all see, is St Pancras. And this is the best of the new and the best of the old. This is the original 1870s train shed in St Pancras Station, but completely refitted when St Pancras was modernised for Eurostar. And when it became St Pancras International for HS1, and immediately behind me, if I move, you can see, are the new platforms for the Eurostar, which have been put in underneath that great Barlow train shed, which was one of the great wonders of the world in the 1870s. I think any teenager who for the first time visits St Pancras Station now St Pancras International. I think it's one of the wonders of the world, and that's what we need to be doing in our schools. Is getting
it is truly wonderful,
young people
isn't it?
out so they can see all this, and then they become inspired by it.
Finally, Andrew, for me, creativity is absolutely everything, and my mission is to sell the importance of art and creative subjects to the communities, to voters, so that they'll vote for a party, whichever party that is, that celebrates creativity. Next year is 2022, and it's the National Festival of Creativity and Innovation, Festival UK 2022. It's been dubbed the Brexit Festival, which makes me rather cross. And I had an article in The Guardian recently, or a piece in The Guardian, saying it is the Brexit Festival as much as this is Brexit Britain. Whether or not you voted for it, if you did or didn't, we've got to get on with it. What are your thoughts about Festival UK 2022, the spending of £120 million on a national celebration of creativity to position the country and also to try and reconnect this country with the arts and creativity? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's a fantastic opportunity, a kind of Festival of Britain. We should definitely go with it. And we certainly shouldn't politicise it by saying that it's celebrating Brexit. We should be doing this, celebrating who we are as a people, our culture, our diversity, and our internationalism, which includes Europe, where, you know, all of those things we do in the arts and the creative industries are European as well as British, and they go well beyond. You know, we have this incredibly close linguistic and other partnership with the United States, long historic ties with all those territories that were, you know, part of the British Empire. But also so many other countries beyond as well. We should celebrate the lot. That should all be part of the festival. And we absolutely shouldn't be politicising it by saying it's Brexit, but nor should we be inward-looking in any way. We should be outward-looking and seek to engage as much abroad as we do at home in celebrating what makes us so successful and so distinctive.
Absolutely, I'm glad to hear you say
yeah,
that.
All power to you, Nick.
Thank
with
you.
That.
I mean,
anything I can give, I'd be delighted to.
Well, I'm going to hold you to that. I've been told I'm getting blacklisted by arts groups for promoting and advocating for that campaign and that project, and do I look like I care? I'm sorry, but if £120 million is being spent on creativity and communities, let's make sure it's well spent.
Yeah, definitely.
We didn't get shortlisted for that, but I'm on a mission to raise £2 million to put 22 people like me on the road next year with a little trailer behind the car, running into communities, running creative events, going in schools, connecting communities. And I'm also talking to Ironbridge about running an event with them as part of that year. I don't know if you'd be interested in maybe a coffee when I get back to town about maybe some ideas and seeing that we talk about the railway companies, the people you know. That would be a fantastic
delighted to do that. Yeah, and all power to you, Nick. I think it's a great idea, and it's really great to be at your festival this evening as well.
Well, I'm the patron of Ludlow Fringe. I'm a Ludlow boy, born and bred, but it's building these connections, bringing connections, whether it's you, a Transport Secretary, someone who's passionate about this country and its role in the world, as much as Glenn Matlock tomorrow night in the Bull Yard, who's one of the rebels who's using art and creativity to inspire, to engage, to make people active and make a change. So grateful to you tonight, Andrew, for joining us. I don't know if you've got any final words. You said that it's good news for the railways. Do you want to build on that?
Just, I find it inspiring, so I hope you're inspired too. I think there's a great renaissance of the creative industries which will take place post-COVID, and I hope of the transport industries too. But they're only as good as the people who go into them. And it's been a phenomenally successful 30 years in England for the creative industries, and it's becoming a very successful period for our transport industries too. And I think big projects like HS2, like Crossrail, like these metro schemes I was talking about, they offer a really bright and attractive future, which I hope will be inspiring for young people. So yeah, let's do it together. It's
all with our kids. They are our futures. We talk about creative carers, people who care about creativity, care about children, and care about all our futures, as Sir Ken Robinson used to say. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Andrew. Really do appreciate it. Bye-bye now.
Great to be with you. All the best.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Well, that was a delight. Fantastic. So we've gone from model railways through cultural relevance all the way through to the politics and policy with somebody whose job literally was planning railway systems for this country. It was absolutely fantastic. So delighted to have Andrew Adonis on there tonight. And thanks to all our speakers. We've been so lucky to have a fantastic lineup of people. Really has been very, very special. It's getting a bit dark in here now. When I can actually see the screen, it's brighter than. Christian Woolmer, who talked about his books and his work and his thinking. Simon Bolton, fantastic to hear from him. Lawrence Robbins from the Model Railway Club in London. And Keith Good, local model railway enthusiast, model scratch maker as well. It's been absolutely brilliant. And of course, Andrew Adonis there at the end there. Really, really grateful to everybody for joining us. Thank you very much. Our next Art Connects 21 event is tomorrow night, The Art of Rebels in the Bullyard, which will be a bit like this, but with Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols, Chris Sullivan, the author and impresario who's written a book called Rebel Rebels, and local punks, skiffle punks, Fred Ward from Pig Days. Thank you very much for joining us. We're making it up as we go along, if that wasn't obvious, but very, very grateful to everybody for supporting us and being part of this and helping us along the way. Thanks to our stewards tonight, our capacity crowd who stayed with us, and all our speakers. Thank you so much. Good night.